An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 55, The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. Ugh. Atop the snow-capped peak, swirling winds engulfed the ground with a blinding white mist of snow and ice. 15 silent figures watched their master. Below, thousands of feet at the base of the massive cliff, an army awaiting. Tens of thousands completely stock still, all awaiting for their mystical leader to emerge from his cave, to lead them to glory. Not that they ever think of their mission in such terms, or any for that matter. Seated, cross-legged, eyes closed, visions ran through the master's head, of a time long past. His soul free from the malevolent prison in his new body kept him in. Unseeing, unfeeling, deprived of every emotion other than rage and sheer force of will. Of a time spent with the ones he loved, his sister and wife and son and best friend. Simpler times, before they took it all away from him. Before he broke free and moved to slaughter them all. And now he felt a spirit upon the world, a spirit not seen by him in millennia, since the last great battle where they had clashed. The body that inhabited that spirit was long dead, but it had returned. He is familiar. That boy, the one from Hardhome. He is in the south, close to her homeland. Eyes flying open, bright blue casting a shadow upon the walls of the cavern, the Night King stood. Grabbing his ice scepter, he felt the power of winter enter his spirit, bringing his ability to the intensity of old, if only for now. Striking the tip hard into the rock, he began a chain reaction that would bring about the end of the spirit before it grew powerful once more. His expression was unchanged, but inwardly, the Night King smiled. Thunder boomed as the beautiful malevolence of glowing lightning bolt zigzagged into the undulating mass of water below. Rain pelting down from the grey-black clouds of icy typhoon. John could barely see past Rhaegal's snout. Fucking storm, he muttered under his breath. It had come out of nowhere, engulfing them out of what once was pure sunlight just as they passed the coastline of Old Valyria. I can barely see! Arms wrapped around Rhaegal's spines, Ollie was shaking in fear. Barristan had more steel in his spine, but concern welled up inside him as well. A huge gust nearly stalled Rhaegal mid-air. He yelled at Jon, "Perhaps we should turn back to land. Wait out the storm." Feeling the rumblings within their connection, Jon could feel that Rhaegal was feeling the fear as well. "Perhaps we could turn north and wait out near Lys." "Storms never appear at this time of year," came the nagging voice in the back of his head. It sounded a lot like Bran. He knew the weather patterns from Mosador's briefings before he left. Strange. Very strange. "Sire!" shouted Ollie over the howling winds, eyes peering as he tried to see through the rain splashing into his face. "What is that?" Jon barely had time to register what Ollie had said before the world exploded around them. Lowering the spyglass, the captain turned to his king. "Near direct hit, sire." Below him, the massive man-of-war ship, the Kraken, rocked up as the wave slammed into it. The drowned god was in a foul mood that night. "But the beast is still airborne." Euron Greyjoy, hair matted to his forehead and eyes wild with a murderous intensity, stared up at the swirling black clouds. "Prepare another volley!" he bellowed, the sky illuminated for a moment by crackling bolts of lightning. "All ships, keep firing!" Obeying the order, his men dashed around their positions, signal lamps blaring orders at the other 5 ships sailing in ragged formation around the Kraken, likely shot to hell by the storm. Snarling into the din of thunder, Euron would have the dragon wolf and his beast to add to his collection, if he had to summon the entirety of the deep blue sea to do so. The crews of all the ships scrambled into action, following the lead of their flagship. Tar-drenched projectiles were loaded into catapults, while delicate rockets were aimed on deck. The storm caught them unawares, but the iron-born sailors were born to fight in typhoons and cyclones of open waters. Slowly, the gunnery officers began to triangulate the position of the dragon of the north. Fire! Sharp barbs of water peppered Jon's face, hair a mess and stinging his eyes. Boy, bank left! Feeling Rhaegal lurch, fiery projectiles were rocketing through the powerful gales mere yards from Rhaegal's right wing. Somehow they had stumbled up into the middle of a group of ironborn ships. Their luck had run out eventually. I can't hold on! Screamed Ollie, while Barristan grit his teeth as the dragon lurched violently. Motherfuck! Motherfuck! Blinking water out of his eyes, Jon spotted where the catapults had fired from. Flashes in orange-yellow lancing up as they fired in ill-aimed rockets. Sending the mental command to his dragon, Rhaegal roared and dove straight at the ship. Dracarys! Stalling in the air with the beat of his massive wings, Rhaegal released an unholy inferno of dragon fire at the ironborn ship. The stout wood of the Iron Island was tough, but dragon fire proved a far more stubborn a tool. Screams filled the stormy air as snaps of wood popped into the night. As the third rate split in two from the dragon's unrelenting fire, the helmsmen of the other ships spun the wheels as far around as they could go. Hard turns nearly capsized one, other two barely managing to avoid colliding as the churning waves sent them into violent jinks and rolls. Any lesser sailor would be broken, but not the Ironborn. What is dead may never die. Fire rising within him, Euron jerked his head back at the gunners. Why aren't you pricks firing? Searching for his useless eunuch of a nephew had brought the prize of a lifetime into his grasp, and he would be damned if he would let it slip away. My king! The beast is in the direction of our other ships! The other officer shouted back, If we fire and miss! He was cut off as Euron slammed the man into the face, slugging him right in the face. The man, blood mixing with water as his nose broke. Heaving him up, the king of the Iron Islands tossed the screaming man overboard. Eyes wild in near madness, the blue-white glare of the lightning turned him into a near demon. Any other helpful suggestions? He asked, voice syrupy sweet. None were forthcoming. Good. Now you morons better hit that fucker or the crabs will have more than an appetizer. Fiery jets lanced off the hull of the ship. Feeling the heat from Rhaegal's tongue of flame fight the cold of the rain, a flash caught Jon's vision as he turned his head. His eyes widened as twin streaks came closer. He yells of Valyrian command. It was too late. 2 rockets detonated on Rhaegal's side, showering sparks and jets of fire along the scaly skin of the gigantic beast. Soft-skinned variants, the fire alone couldn't penetrate the fire-made flesh, but the shockwave sent Rhaegal into a wild jink. The human passengers struggled to hold on to the spines at the sudden jolt. Ollie and Barristan were successful, rain making up the spines slippery to the touch. It was Jon that failed to keep his gloved hand, refused to gain traction. The jolt sent him tumbling off of the beast's back, a loud roar shaking the very heavens as the Targaryen Emperor hurtled further and further to the churning seas below. Watching the tiny, dark shape tumble from the dragon's back in the blue-white light of the god's fury, Euron bared his teeth in a terrifying leer. Those around him had long ago realised that there were several screws loose in his head, but the younger brother of the hated Balon Greyjoy was the true drowned king they all dreamed of following. And now their king had taken down the White Dragon Wolf. And the Kraken claims his prize! He whooped into the fury of the storm itself. Keep firing! Pain. Jon felt the pain first, like a whip slamming into his body parallel to the length of his spine. Water enveloped him as soon as he smashed into the surface of the rolling sea. The cry of anguish sucked icy cold liquid down his throat, stabbing his insides with 1,000 pricks. The salt water stung his eyes, and he blindly thrashed about in the pitch-black water around him. Lessons in the river with Jon and Sansa within the wolf's wood as a child prepared him a little for the stormy seas, unable to even see through his inflamed eyes of the surface. Gradually, the ocean blackness drew him deeper and deeper. Suddenly, a flash of lightning sent the shining rays of light piercing through the churning, murky depths. It lasted but an instant, but Jon saw the surface. closer than it seemed. Malevolent tendrils of death already beginning to envelop him, the Emperor. Malevolent tendrils of death already beginning to envelop him, the Emperor summoned his fortitude and kicked with all of his might. Arms threw upward through the waves, batting the water aside as he ascended towards the surface, away from death's door, towards an uncertain future. He could work with those odds. Erupting out of the water, Jon sucked in a delicious breath of air before the winds and waves dragged him onto water once more. Kicking with all of his might, the Emperor fought the hold of the Kraken. His entire reality melted into a swirling pot of water and rain-drenching sky. Arms lashing out at anything until at last they made contact with solid wood, a floating piece of debris from the Ironborn ship. Jon hauled his upper torso onto it, gripping the soaked timber with all his strength. Above, the lances of flame hurled themselves at Rhaegal, the beast braving them to search for him. His cries were desperate, pained, bellowing for his rider. Knowing they couldn't survive this, Jon made one of the hardest decisions in his life. In an instant, go! Dodging a rocket, Rhaegal let out a tragic hoot. No! Never! Go! Jon mentally screamed. Hovering in the air for what seemed like forever, a primal screech left Rhaegal. Louder than the rockets, louder than the churning seas, louder than the angry heavens above. As it died, the beast's wings beat heavily as he turned and headed landward, away from the death and chaos. Fists clenching in rage, Euron stared out at the dark sea and the receding form of the dragon. "Wow, boys!" he yelled, deciding to take one of the wins he had. "Tonight we killed an emperor!" Cheers rang out as he basked in the glory of it all. "Good boy," Jon thought, eyes fluttering shut as he clung to the debris. "Good boy." "Get in there, fucking morons!" Groups of men with crossbows offering cover. The overseers and poor fellows shoved the last remaining slaves into their pens for the night. "You two bitch! Get in there before I get my prick out!" Sparing a single glare over her shoulder, Arya complied, losing her petite form in the mass of milling people caged like animals. The threat wasn't usually idle, but the overseers had already collected nearly 24 young pretty girls for their use overnight. Arya did not want to be one of them. Killing the guards would blow her cover, and the hope was that Joffrey would simply forget about her. There was no chance Littlefinger ever would, though. Just the thought of him made her skin crawl. Joffrey, Cersei, Ilyn Payne, Littlefinger. Suddenly she felt herself lifted up and over her shoulder as the gate shut with a loud clang, sealing them in for the night. "Let's go, girlie." Sandor Clegane's gruff voice was recognisable anywhere. Arya was not amused. "Put me down!" she huffed, more annoyed than anything. "Shut up!" At her pounding of his back, the hound chuckled dryly. "I might not have my armour, sweetheart, but all you're doing is pissing me the fuck off." With an angry sigh, Arya propped her head up by the elbow and went along with him. "Don't you mind him, sweet pea." Adorned with a cheery smile, Beric Dondarrion was less of a pain than the hound. Most of the time, anyway. "He just hates King's Landing." "I hate everything and everywhere," came the grumble. A laugh. "We know, Sandor. We know." Walking ahead of Arya and Clegane, Beric bringing up the rear, Thoros of Myr found his route rather open. The slaves gave them a wide berth, both respectful and fearful. No one ever ratted them out, but while the guards weren't looking... "Tell the girl." Beric smiled wider, winking. "There's someone we want you to meet, little wolf." "I'm not included in that we, in case you're wondering." Clegane was as direct as ever. "I wasn't wondering in case you were wondering," Arya shot back, amused at his likely reaction. Apparently the former nobleman was as well. "I liked her before, and I still do." All three of them shared a laugh at the hound's expense. Jovial attitudes began to fade away as they approached the far corner of the pen, one marked off by crude reed slats that had likely handwoven. Arya noticed several burly Essosi guards, each with a dagger tattoo on their temple. Volantine slaves. One didn't reside in King's Landing of today without being able to pick up on such things. Seated in the centre, surrounded by candles, was a lone woman in a pose of deep meditation. Clegane set Arya down and plopped onto the ground, completely disinterested. Arya ignored him. "Who is this?" she asked Beric. "Someone of the highest importance." That was self-evident. Even with the segregation into castes as seen among the slaves, a private area with guards was unheard of. Before any of them could say anything to her, the lady's voice preempted them. "Thoros, you smell like a distillery." She didn't even spare him a glance, her back to the Red Priest and former knight. Thoros grinned weakly. "We all have our ways of worshipping the Lord, and it helps with the aches and pains." "Sobriety is good for the soul, dear Thoros." Cracking her neck with a groan, the woman stood, turning to face them. She was a beauty, noted Arya. Tanned skin, blue eyes, raven hair. Obviously of the Free Cities. A woman sure of herself, but without any arrogant flair that a noblewoman would have. "Who is this?" Bowing, Beric grabbed Arya's shoulders. "This is the connection we have to the resurrected Lord Priestess." He patted her arm. "Arya Stark, sister to the White Wolf." Arya Stark? Stepping closer to her, the lady looked Arya over with piqued curiosity and wonder. "Valar Morghulis, young Stark." "Valar Dohydus," came the instinctive reply. The look she was getting was discomforting to Arya. She couldn't place it. "I am not sure what is going on, to be honest." The lady smiled. "I doubt you would. For I can see you are quite practical, even considering the history of your house and your individual experiences." Reaching out, she ran a finger over her cheek and forehead. "Where are my manners? I am Kinvara, priestess of this particular slice of the earth." "A pretty shitty slice." Clegane spat, scarfing down a piece of stale bread. "It is pretty shitty," Arya shrugged. "He wasn't wrong there." Kinvara giggled slightly. "Perhaps. You have a point there. But if the Lord of Light wills me to be here, then there is a reason. For I, and for you." Eyebrow raised, she could tell the young girl felt her slightly crazy. "Come, Arya of House Stark. All will be explained. But for now, sleep." Kinvara gestured to a collection of cots close by. "Any family of the reborn fire, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, deserves the finest of hospitality that I may offer." The fatigue of the day's labour, if crippling for her. She shuddered to think of how hauling the massive stones up by the pyramid day after day was affecting Beric, Thoros, the Hound, or all of the others. Arya simply collapsed onto her cot. No one dared touch it. Reserved for her and her only, thanks to the reputation of the Brotherhood among the slaves. Though Clegane's muscles and hard attitude didn't hurt, she thought with a snort. Before sleep took a hold of her, she looked up into the open air, wall penning her in just low enough to make out the tops of the Red Keep, where the little bitch that called himself the Chimera slept in pampered luxury. "Rest up, Joffrey," she murmured softly, almost a hiss. "A girl always completes her list." Gazing down at the city, the throbbing heart of his great empire, Joffrey shuddered. It was as if some malevolent force tipped off a sixth sense within him. "Enough of this shit!" he yelled to no one in particular. "You are just making up things!" He was the eternal ruler. The Chimera. No one would dare harm him in his crown jewel. "Did you say something, Your Grace?" Peter Baelish kept his eyes trained on the small stack of parchment in front of him. Outwardly, the epitome of a respectable supplicant and trusted confidant. Few could grace the Chimera's inner sanctum, and he was one. Joffrey raised him up. "Shut up! Shut up and let me think!" Head pulsing, he tossed an apple from the plate of fruit decorating the fine oaken table and threw it at Dantas Hollard. But the eerie feeling from before had not only interrupted his train of thought, but taken away all pleasure from torturing the fallen knight and watching him squirm. Snarling, he stormed to his grooming pedestal. Clearing his throat, Qyburn interjected, "All highest, if I may. I believe you were worried about the failure of the corrupted blood slavers to neutralize the Stark bastard." Unfortunate, but not surprising. The high sparrow, Matty Burlap shift causing his skin to itch, was always welcome in the quarters of the king. The devoted pseudo-religious figure flattered his ego. Those that trade in human souls into bondage for something as trifling as profit. The sparrow's voice took on a sombre quality, not comprehending the irony. Being a mere bargaining chip sets the innate zeal to work and provide for the gods and their anointed one. Littlefinger eyed him carefully. Quite. Covering his face with his fingers, he looked up at Joffrey. Or the highest, with your grandfather and your uncle in the field. The High Admiral at sea, and your mother, indisposed, the three of us need your skilled mind to resolve the pressing concern. Free of his veil and cumbersome silks, Joffrey indulged in the finely prepared meats, fruits, and breads that his sensitive palate could handle, the blind servants gently removing his clothes and cleaned the pale skin with oil-infused rags. I want the stark bastard dead. It does not concern me any longer as to where, only that it is done. There was an odd resignation in his voice, a desperation born for once not out of anger. My little birds have found quite a possible contact out of his life, said Qyburn. The faceless men, all highest. Blasphemers of the worst sort, scoffed the High Sparrow. The Seven wince at their chosen representatives allying with such filth. We can beg for their forgiveness after the fact, High Sparrow, Littlefinger replied. In the here and now, all that matters is defeating our mutual enemies. At least Euron Greyjoy is trying. His last raven had him on the trail of his nephew, his niece already chained in the bilge of his flagship, although the unctuous aristocrat's lips curled in a tight smile. Perhaps we could resort to alternate means. There was a silence. What kind of means? Joffrey asked. Spit it out! There is something that would bring the untimely death. There is something that would bring the untimely death of Jon Snow, all highest. Unlike all but Lord Tywin and possibly Qyburn, Littlefinger knew who Snow was. It complicated matters. Something that someone we have once known was proficient in. Means from the occult. Mouth agape, the High Sparrow tried to speak, but the words found it hard to escape his mouth. That, he finally stammered, that is black magic! An affront to the gods themselves! It would not be an affront to them if their chosen representative of this earth oversees it. Littlefinger shot back. It would be highly effective, I believe. I have it on good authority that black magic such as this caused the death of the traitor Renly. My traitorous scum of an uncle was killed by his sworn sword. Joffrey sneered behind the curtains. Teaches him to trust a woman. A woman did kill him, all highest. Just not that woman. The Red Witch. The king fell silent. Breaking that silence, Qyburn felt intrigued on top of the on-edge fear that everyone else granted access to Joffrey for even a single meeting or audience. This might work, but for the type of ceremony to be effective, to take out someone of royal blood. Royal blood? Jon Snow has the blood of the Starks, and therefore the Kings of Winter, and Daenerys is of royal blood as well. It requires a ceremony involving the same type of blood. Targaryen or Baratheon blood. Old scrolls in the Citadel told of these type of rituals. The High Sparrow may seem resigned. Viserys Targaryen would work, or any of the Starks. No. Qyburn shook his head. The power of the ritual leads not with the blood of the victim, but with the blood of the conqueror. That would mean the blood of his highest. Baratheon blood. Wincing, the topic of discussion was unsettling even for him, the man known for such black experiments that had seen him booted out of the Citadel. You have to realize that this is magic of the darkest order, and that even the Red Woman would be hesitant to. Tell me, and we will do it. There was no hesitance in Joffrey's voice. You cannot seriously be considering this. Falling into step beside the wheelchair, She looked at her younger brother incredulously. "It's madness!" "I have to do it, Sansa," came the reply, barely any emotion behind it. They pushed into the courtyard, an oddly cloudless sky above them, stars shining down. It was as if the entirety of the storms and blizzards had left the north for places elsewhere. Halting on the cobblestones, the redhead couldn't make heads or tails of what had happened to her normally carefree brother. Joy had filled her and Rickon as Eberron brought Bran back to Winterfell for the first time since Theon betrayed them. With Howland Reed there, it had been happy reunions all round. Not to mention meeting the newly healed Hodor, which was quite a shock. But it had all turned into chaos once Bran announced he was headed for north of the Wall. It was completely out of the blue, and no one could talk him out of it. "Are you sure about this, Mira?" Howland looked resigned to the fact. Always a far more spiritual man than even the average northerner. He was taking the impending journey to the hells of the lands of always winter better than the more level-headed Sansa Stark, but still worried. Looking up at her father as Willis and the other servants loaded Bran onto the dragon's back, Mira nodded. "The same force that helped us out of Karth is calling him to somewhere in the vast wilderness." Sansa raced to join in the others clustered around Eberron. Mira began climbing onto his back. "I don't like it, but I'm not going to quibble with the means of Bran's visions." "But—" Huffing in frustration, Sansa looked to the young Reed. "Mira, talk some sense into him, for God's sake! He'll get himself killed!" Sighing, Mira met the eyes of the older redhead. "I'm sorry, Lady Stark. I long ago had to accept that Bran has a gift that I cannot truly understand. If he says he must travel north of the Wall, then I must believe him." Looking down on his family, nay, all of the people of Winterfell gathered around, Bran smiled softly as Eberron readied his wings. "I shall return. Do not worry about me." With a roar, the dragon ascended into the sky, flying ever higher towards the stars of the heavens above. They stared as the grey-white beast disappeared into the darkness of the night. "What are you going to do, sister?" Rickon asked. Pursing her lips together, she waved to Master Walken. "Prepare a raven for River Run. I need to warn my sister about this." Mind a delirious haze, Jon barely registered the rope being wrapped around his weak, parched and drenched body, and hauling him upwards. His shoulder smacked against something hard several times, the pain registering somewhat, but too little to matter much considering what he went through. Grunting, he was hauled over the side of a ship. Probably a ship. No, it was a ship. "Looks like there was a survivor," said a voice in the accent of the Iron Islands. In the back of Jon's tired mind, it didn't seem hostile. His hand drifted to his belt. Longclaw was still on its scabbard. Thank the gods. Canteen thrust onto him. Jon resisted the urge to gulp it all down like a parched oaf. Remembering his boyhood lessons, he gently took the bottle of magical elixir and sipped slowly, savouring the quenching liquid as if it were the nectar of the gods themselves. After draining nearly all of it, taking several minutes to do so, he finally looked up at his rescuers. A familiar face stood out. "Theon," he croaked, throat still impossibly dry. The Prince of the Iron Islands, Admiral of the Imperial Navy, and former ward of House Stark nodded back. "Jon," he replied awkwardly. The tension from their first reunion didn't seem to have dissipated. Around them, the Ironborn men were taken aback. "Dis the Emperor?" one asked incredulously. "Looks like him," another remarked. Theon bowed, settling the matter. "Your Majesty, welcome to the sea bitch." Eyes widening, the crew all bowed as well. Pushing up to shaky feet, Jon nearly stumbled but was caught by Theon. "What are you doing here?" he asked, confused. "Shouldn't you be at White Harbour?" That's what the dispatches had said. Plus, it was the only remaining defensible port. Goldtown was closer to the action, but was a sitting duck for an attack. Letting his surrogate brother lean on him for support, Theon guided him towards his cabin. "Gave the order to scatter the ships at Dragonstone after Yara was captured, and we broke out. Seems Euron is on my tail, so we sailed south to protect the rest of the fleet." "Storm saved our asses, Your Majesty," the captain stated. "Moron-Face was right on us before the gales threw 'em all out of whack." Digesting this new info, John knew they must have been further out to sea than he hoped. If they had been closer, then Rhaegal would have sensed him out.
But he sensed me from all the way out across the world. Why can't he now?
Something deeper was afoot, when he couldn't get a bearing on.
Do you know where we are?
Sly, did you get a reading before sunrise? Theon asked his navigator.
Aye, about 600-700 miles south-southeast of Lys. Give or take.
He wasn't as sure as John would have liked, but it would do for now.
The winds are blowing eastward.
John nodded weakly.
Good. Set course for old Valyria.
Blinking, Theon looked at him as they reached the door of his cabin. We need to get you around the enemy's greatest safeguard. You can take a horse to Riverrun. He was silenced by an intense glance. The frown on John's face curled into a smirk.
Trust me.
End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that because, oh boy, that was intense. And Euron is in for a shock when he finds out John's alive. And poor John. I mean, I've never drowned, but good lord, I don't like sinking in water, even in a pool, let alone the ocean. And poor Ollie embarrassed in thinking that John's dead. I mean, Ollie basically sees John as the father. That's just sad. And it looks like Theon and John are finally starting to be cool with each other. Thank goodness. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!